The dust swirled across the main street of Eldorado Canyon, Nevada, as Vivian Palmer clutched her reticule tighter and quickened her pace. The year was 1876, and the small mining town was hardly the place she had envisioned for herself when she'd left Philadelphia 3 months prior. But her father's debts had left her with few options, and her aunt's letter had promised opportunity in the West, even for a woman alone. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Vivian approached the general store. Her emerald green skirt, once considered fashionable back east, now seemed impractical and cumbersome as it swept across the dusty boardwalk. Still, she maintained her posture, determined to preserve what little dignity she had left after the journey. Miss Palmer. Mr. Higgins, the storekeeper, called out as she entered. "Your order from Carson City arrived on yesterday's wagon." Vivian smiled politely, grateful for the small comforts that connected her to civilization. "Thank you, Mr. Higgins. I hope it wasn't too much trouble." "No trouble at all for our schoolteacher," he replied, retrieving a paper-wrapped parcel from beneath the counter. It had been nearly 2 months since Vivian had taken the position at Eldorado Canyon's one-room schoolhouse. The children were eager enough to learn, though their education had been spotty at best before her arrival. It wasn't the life she had planned, but she was making do surviving, if not thriving. She had just paid for her package when the commotion outside caught her attention. The rumble of wagon wheels and the pounding of hooves announced the arrival of the weekly stagecoach from Virginia City. Normally, Vivian would have continued with her errands, but something, perhaps boredom, perhaps fate, drew her to the door. The stage rolled to a stop in front of the Silverton Hotel across the street, dust billowing around the vehicle and its team of 6 horses. The driver jumped down, followed by a man Vivian had never seen before. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in practical clothing that had seen its fair share of trail dust. A worn leather hat shaded his face, but even from a distance, Vivian could see he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to the wilderness. "Another prospector, you think?" Mr. Higgins asked, coming to stand beside her in the doorway. "Or perhaps a gunslinger," Vivian replied with a slight smile, though she knew such men were far less common than the dime novels would have readers believe. She was about to turn away when the stage driver began unloading luggage, and the stranger moved to assist him. As he did so, his hat tilted back, revealing a strong jawline and features that, even at this distance, Vivian found herself appreciating. "That's Jack Norris," Mr. Higgins said with sudden recognition. "Haven't seen him in these parts for at least 3 years. You know him." Everybody knew Jack, best horse trainer in Nevada territory before he left. Wonder what brings him back to Eldorado. Vivian watched as the man Jack Norris hefted a trunk from the stagecoach with apparent ease. "Is he from here originally?" "No, madam. Came from somewhere back east, I believe. Worked the Flying W ranch outside town until there was some trouble." Mr. Higgins lowered his voice. "Some say he got caught up with the wrong woman, the ranch owner's daughter. Others say it was a gambling debt. Either way, he disappeared overnight." Vivian found herself intrigued despite her better judgment. In Philadelphia, she had been courted by respectable men with clean fingernails and impeccable pedigrees. None had stirred her interest the way this stranger did with just his silhouette against the dusty street. "Well, I should be going," she said, gathering her parcel. "Thank you again, Mr. Higgins." She stepped out onto the boardwalk, intending to continue to the dressmaker's shop down the street. But as she descended the steps to cross the road, she failed to notice the approaching wagon. The driver called out a warning, pulling his team to a sharp halt just as Vivian looked up, startled. She stepped back hastily, but it was too late. Her skirt had caught in the wagon wheel. The fabric pulled tight, nearly yanking her off her feet as she clutched desperately at a nearby hitching post. "Hold still, madam," a deep voice commanded, and suddenly Jack Norris was there, kneeling beside the wheel where her skirt was hopelessly tangled. "I can't," Vivian began, feeling her face flush with embarrassment as curious onlookers began to gather. "Easy now," Jack said, his voice gentle as he worked to free the fabric from the spokes. "You'll be free in just a moment." His hands moved deftly, careful not to tear the material as he worked it loose from the wheel. Vivian found herself staring at those hands, strong, weathered, yet handling the delicate fabric of her skirt with unexpected care. When at last he managed to extricate the last of the material, he rose to his feet, and Vivian found herself looking directly into the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen. "Thank you," she managed, suddenly aware of how close he stood. "Jack Norris," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "And you are Vivian Palmer. I'm the school teacher." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "Miss Palmer," he nodded. "You ought to be more careful crossing the street. Eldorado Canyon isn't Philadelphia." Vivian blinked, taken aback. "How did you know I'm from Philadelphia?" A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Your accent and those shoes." He nodded toward her buttoned boots, now covered in dust but still unmistakably Eastern in style, not made for Western roads. Before she could respond, he tipped his hat again and turned away, retrieving his belongings from where he dropped them to come to her aid. "Mr. Norris," she called after him, unsure why she felt compelled to prolong the interaction. "Are you returning to Eldorado Canyon to stay?" He paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. "That remains to be seen, Miss Palmer." With that, he continued toward the hotel, leaving Vivian standing in the street with her rescued skirt and an inexplicable sense that her carefully ordered life in Eldorado Canyon had just been irrevocably changed. The following morning, Vivian arrived at the schoolhouse earlier than usual. The encounter with Jack Norris had left her oddly unsettled, and she found that throwing herself into her work provided the best distraction. She was arranging books on the shelves when a knock at the door drew her attention. Sheriff Miller stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Morning, Miss Palmer." "Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Sheriff. What can I do for you?" "Well, it's about the town meeting tonight. The committee was hoping you might take notes, seeing as you have the best penmanship among us." Vivian nodded. "Of course. What's the topic of discussion?" "The railroad." The sheriff shook his head. "There's talk of the line bypassing Eldorado Canyon in favor of a route through Ruby Valley. Would be a heavy blow to the town's future if it happens." "I see," Vivian said, though in truth she wasn't entirely certain of the implications. "I'll be there." After the sheriff departed, Vivian continued preparing for the day's lessons. The schoolhouse was modest but functional, with rows of wooden desks facing a larger desk at the front of the room. A pot-bellied stove stood in the corner, unnecessary now in the summer heat but vital during the winter months. Her students began arriving shortly after 8:15, children ranging in age from 6 to 16, the sons and daughters of miners, ranchers, and shopkeepers. The older boys would soon leave school to work alongside their fathers, while many of the girls would marry young. Vivian did her best to instill in all of them a love of learning that might serve them regardless of their paths. "Miss Palmer," 10-year-old Emma Wilson said as she entered, "there's a man with horses outside. He said to tell you he has something of yours." Vivian frowned, setting down her chalk. "Thank you, Emma. Continue with your reading while I see to this." Outside, she found Jack Norris standing beside two horses, his own mount, and a smaller mare. He had exchanged yesterday's travel-worn clothing for clean denim trousers and a blue cotton shirt that brought out the color of his eyes. "Mr. Norris," she said, smoothing her skirt self-consciously. "Emma said you have something of mine." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small silver locket. "Found this after you left yesterday. Must have come loose when your skirt caught." Vivian's hand flew to her throat, where the locket had indeed been hanging the previous day. It contained a miniature portrait of her parents, the only image she had of them since selling their larger portraits to pay creditors. "Oh, I didn't even realize." She reached for it gratefully, her fingers brushing his as she took the locket. "Thank you, it's very precious to me." "Figured as much." He glanced past her at the schoolhouse. "So you're really the teacher here?" "I am. Does that surprise you? Bit of a change from Philadelphia society, I'd imagine." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "You seem to know a great deal about me, Mr. Norris, while I know very little about you beyond rumors of gambling debts or inappropriate dalliances." To her surprise, he laughed, a rich sound that sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Rumors always did travel faster than the stagecoach in Eldorado Canyon. And are they true?" His expression sobered, Some have a grain of truth, others are pure fiction, but I didn't come to discuss my past indiscretions. No, you came to return my locket, Vivian said. And I thank you for that. Actually, Jack said, patting the neck of the smaller mare beside him, I came to offer you a ride home after your school day ends. This is Penny. She's gentle as they come, and I thought you might like to learn to ride properly. Safer than walking these roads, especially for a woman alone. Vivian stared at him, taken aback by the offer. Mr. Norris, I hardly know you. Fair enough, he conceded. But the offer stands. I'll be at the Silverton until I find more permanent lodgings. If you change your mind, just send word. Before she could respond, the school bell began to ring, signaling the start of the day's lessons. One of the older boys, Tom Prescott, had taken it upon himself to perform this duty. I should go, Vivian said, suddenly aware of curious faces peering through the schoolhouse windows. Jack nodded, mounting his horse with fluid grace. Until next time, Miss Palmer. As he rode away, Vivian returned to the schoolhouse, aware that her encounter would be the subject of town gossip before the day was out. Eldorado Canyon might be growing, but it was still small enough that a conversation between the schoolteacher and the returned horse trainer would not go unremarked. Inside, her students watched her with poorly concealed curiosity. That was Mr. Norris, she said matter-of-factly, moving to the chalkboard. He was returning a locket I lost yesterday. Now, let us turn to our geography lesson. Who can tell me the capital of Nevada Territory? The day proceeded with its usual routine, though Vivian found her thoughts returning to Jack Norris more often than she cared to admit. By the time the children were dismissed for the day, she had made her decision. After tidying the schoolhouse, she made her way to the Silverton Hotel. The lobby was sparsely populated at this hour, with only the desk clerk and a couple of traveling salesmen in evidence. I'm looking for Mr. Norris, she told the clerk, a pimply young man who regarded her with surprise. Room 3, Miss Palmer, but he's not in. Said he was heading to the livery stable. Vivian thanked him and redirected her steps to the livery at the edge of town. The smell of hay and horses greeted her as she entered the dim interior. It took a moment for her eyes to adjust, but she soon spotted Jack in a stall toward the back, brushing down Penny's chestnut coat. Mr. Norris, she called, approaching with more confidence than she felt. He turned, surprise evident on his features. Miss Palmer, didn't expect to see you here. I've reconsidered your offer, she said. I would like to learn to ride properly. A slow smile spread across his face. Would you now? Yes, it seems a practical skill for life here, as you pointed out. She smoothed her skirts, a simpler blue cotton more suited to teaching than her green one had been for town errands. Though I should warn you, I've never been on a horse before. Never, not even in Philadelphia. Carriages, yes. Horses, no. Jack considered this. Might be easier to start with a side saddle, considering your usual attire. Vivian shook her head. I've observed that the women who have lived here longest often wear split skirts for riding. I've asked Mrs. Henderson, the dressmaker, to make me one. Jack's eyebrows rose. Forward thinking of you. I'm adaptable, Mr. Norris. One must be to survive in a place like this. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Sunday afternoon, then, after church services? That would be suitable, she hesitated. There's a town meeting tonight at the courthouse. About the railroad, will you attend? Hadn't planned on it. My business is horses, not railroads. But you're a resident of Eldorado Canyon, are you not? Or at least you were. The railroad's path could determine the town's future. Jack returned to brushing Penny, his movements methodical. Some would say I forfeited my right to a voice in town matters when I left the way I did. And what would you say? He paused, looking back at her. I'd say that's between me and those I wronged, but since you're curious, Miss Palmer, yes, I plan to stay. I've purchased land outside town, the old Miller homestead, for raising horses. That's the plan. Nevada needs good stock, especially with the mining operations expanding. Vivian nodded, taking a step backward. Then I will see you at the town meeting tonight, Mr. Norris. And Sunday for my riding lesson. As she turned to leave, she felt his eyes on her back. She had come to the West seeking a fresh start, a place where her family's financial ruin wouldn't follow her. Never had she imagined finding herself drawn to a man like Jack Norris, a man with secrets in his past and determination in his eyes. But then, Vivian reflected as she stepped back into the sunlight. The West was changing her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Perhaps this, too, was part of her transformation. The town meeting was held in the courthouse, a sturdy wooden structure that served multiple purposes in Eldorado Canyon. By the time Vivian arrived, the room was already crowded with the town's most prominent citizens and many of its ordinary residents as well. The proposed railroad route was of paramount importance to everyone. Mayor Williams, a portly man with an impressive mustache, called the meeting to order. Vivian took her place at a small table to one side, prepared to take notes as requested. From her position, she had a clear view of the entire room, including Jack Norris, who stood near the back wall, arms crossed over his chest. As you all know, the mayor began, the Central Pacific Railroad is surveying routes for a new spur line. Initially, Eldorado Canyon was considered a natural stop, given our mining operations and growing population. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. However, he continued, I've received word that they're now favoring a route through Ruby Valley instead. It would be shorter and require less grading. This news was met with outcries of dismay. Without the railroad, Eldorado Canyon's growth would stagnate. Goods would continue to arrive by wagon at inflated prices, and the mines would face higher costs to transport ore. What can we do about it? Called out Mr. Higgins from the general store. That's why we're here, Mayor Williams replied. The railroad company is sending a representative next month to make a final assessment. We need to present the strongest case possible for routing through Eldorado Canyon. What followed was a spirited discussion of the town's merits and how best to showcase them. Various citizens spoke up, offering suggestions ranging from practical to outlandish. Vivian's quill scratched across the paper as she recorded each proposal. When she glanced up, she found Jack watching her, his expression unreadable. She quickly returned her attention to her notes, but not before a faint blush colored her cheeks. The debate continued for over an hour until Sheriff Miller stood up. What about the Norris land? He asked, gesturing toward Jack. If I recall correctly, the most direct route from the main line would cross that property. Would you be amenable to that, Norris? All eyes turned to Jack, who straightened from his position against the wall. I would, he said simply, for fair compensation. And what would you consider fair? Asked the mayor. Market value for the land used, plus considerations for how the tracks would divide the remaining property. Mayor Williams nodded thoughtfully. That seems reasonable. Would you be willing to write to the railroad company expressing your cooperation? It might help our cause. Jack hesitated, and in that moment, Vivian saw something in his expression: reluctance, perhaps, or uncertainty. I'm not much of a letter writer, he said finally, but yes, I'll support the town's petition. The meeting continued with discussions of infrastructure improvements and plans to welcome the railroad representative, but Vivian found her attention repeatedly drawn to Jack. Something about his hesitation intrigued her. For a man who had apparently decided to make his future in Eldorado Canyon, he seemed strangely detached from its affairs. As the meeting concluded, Vivian gathered her notes to submit to the town clerk. When she looked up, Jack was making his way toward her through the dispersing crowd. Impressive penmanship, he commented, nodding toward her papers. Thank you. It was part of a proper education for young ladies in Philadelphia. Along with piano, French, and watercolors. There was a teasing note in his voice that surprised her, indeed. Though I confess my watercolors were never very good. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. May I walk you home, Miss Palmer? It's getting dark. Vivian hesitated. Propriety suggested she should decline. Unmarried ladies did not walk unaccompanied with gentlemen after dark, even in Eldorado Canyon, but she found herself nodding. That would be kind, Mr. Norris. Thank you. After submitting her notes, they stepped outside into the cooling evening air. The main street was quieter now, with most businesses closed for the day. A few patrons still lingered at the saloon down the street, and lights glowed from the windows of the Silverton Hotel. You seemed hesitant about the railroad matter, Vivian observed as they began walking toward her small house near the schoolyard. Jack glanced at her. Observant of you. It's part of being a teacher. One must notice everything. And what else have you noticed about me, Miss Palmer? The directness of his question caught her off guard. That you're a man who values his privacy, that you left Eldorado Canyon under circumstances you'd rather not discuss, and that despite that, you've chosen to return and put down roots. All true, Jack acknowledged. Anything else? Vivian paused, considering. That you're kind, you returned my locket, you offered to teach me to ride. You're walking me home. They had reached her gate now, the small white picket fence that enclosed her modest yard. In the silver moonlight, Jack's features were softer than they appeared in the harsh daylight. Perhaps I have ulterior motives, he said quietly. Do you? Would it concern you if I did? Vivian should have been offended by his boldness, but instead she found herself intrigued. That would depend on the nature of these motives, Mr. Norris. He studied her face for a long moment before speaking. I've known many women, Miss Palmer, some fine ladies, others less so, but I don't believe I've ever met anyone quite like you. Is that a compliment, an observation? He touched the brim of his hat. Good night, Miss Palmer. I look forward to Sunday. As he walked away, Vivian remained by her gate, watching his retreating figure. She had come to the west to escape her past, not to find romance. Yet she couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach when Jack looked at her, or the way her thoughts kept returning to him. With a sigh, she turned and entered her house. Whatever was developing between her and Jack Norris, it would have to wait until Sunday. For now, she had lessons to prepare and a new life to build, one that didn't depend on any man, no matter how intriguing. Sunday dawned bright and clear, the kind of pristine Nevada day that made even the harshest landscape beautiful. Vivian attended church services as usual, conscious throughout of Jack's presence several pews behind her. He had dressed formally for the occasion, his usually unruly hair combed neatly, his shirt starched and clean. After the service, Vivian exchanged pleasantries with her students' parents and the other townspeople, all the while aware of Jack waiting patiently near the church steps. When at last she was able to make her way to him, she felt uncharacteristically nervous. Miss Palmer, he greeted her, tipping his hat. I trust you're still interested in your riding lesson? I am, she confirmed. I should change first if you wouldn't mind waiting. Not at all. I'll meet you at the livery in an hour. Vivian nodded and hurried home to change into her new riding outfit. Mrs. Henderson had delivered the split skirt the previous day, a practical garment of sturdy blue cotton that allowed her to sit astride a horse while maintaining a semblance of propriety. It felt strange to wear something so different from her usual attire, but when she examined her reflection in the mirror, she had to admit it suited her. At the appointed time, she made her way to the livery stable, conscious of the curious glances her new outfit attracted. Jack was waiting with Penny already saddled and ready. You look prepared, he commented, his eyes taking in her attire with approval. Mrs. Henderson assures me this is what the more progressive women are wearing for riding these days, Vivian said, running a hand self-consciously over the split skirt. It's practical, Jack agreed. And becoming. He led Penny out of the stable and into the yard behind it. We'll start with the basics, how to mount, how to sit, how to communicate with your horse. For the next hour, Jack proved to be a patient teacher. He showed Vivian how to approach Penny, how to speak softly to her, and finally, how to mount using a wooden block. When at last Vivian was seated in the saddle, her hands correctly positioned on the reins, she felt a surge of accomplishment. Now what? She asked, looking down at Jack, who stood beside the horse's head. Now we walk, he said. Gently squeeze with your legs to signal Penny to move forward. Vivian did as instructed, and to her delight, the mare began to walk calmly around the yard. Jack stayed close, offering guidance on how to use the reins to steer and how to maintain her balance. You're a natural, he told her after she had successfully guided Penny through several circuits of the yard. Vivian laughed, the sound light and free. Hardly, but I'm enjoying it more than I expected. Enough to try a short ride outside town. There's a pretty meadow not far from here. She hesitated only briefly before nodding. Yes, I'd like that. Jack saddled his own horse, a sturdy black gelding named Thunder, and soon they were riding side by side down a quiet trail that led away from Eldorado Canyon. The landscape opened up around them, rolling hills dotted with sagebrush and occasional stands of pinyon pine, the distant mountains blue against the horizon. "It's beautiful," Vivian said, taking in the vista. "So different from Pennsylvania." "Less green," Jack agreed. "But there's a stark beauty to the desert that grows on you." They rode in comfortable silence for a time, the only sounds the rhythmic hoofbeats and the occasional call of a desert bird. Vivian found herself relaxing into the motion of the horse, her initial nervousness giving way to enjoyment. The meadow Jack had mentioned appeared before them, a small oasis of green fed by a natural spring. Wildflowers dotted the grass, adding splashes of color to the scene. "This is lovely," Vivian said as they dismounted. Jack tied both horses to a nearby tree where they could graze on the lush grass. "Found it by accident my first month in Eldorado Canyon," he told her. "Been coming here ever since when I need to think." They settled on a fallen log near the spring, the sun warm on their faces. Vivian removed her hat, allowing the light breeze to cool her flushed cheeks. "Why did you come to Nevada, Mr. Norris?" she asked. "You mentioned you're from the East as well." Jack was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the distant mountains. "New York," he said finally. "My father owned a shipping business, expected me to join him when I finished school." "But you didn't want to." "No," we argued. "I left." His shoulders lifted in a shrug that seemed designed to diminish the significance of this rupture. "Worked my way west, learned about horses from an old cavalry sergeant in Missouri, eventually ended up here. And your family?" "My mother died when I was young. Father remarried. We haven't spoken in years." There was a weight of unspoken history in his words that Vivian recognized all too well. "I understand estrangement," she said softly. "After my parents died and the creditors came, cousins I'd known all my life suddenly couldn't remember my name." Jack looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing beneath the composed exterior she presented to the world. "Is that why you came here, to escape the past?" "Partly. And because teaching positions for women are more plentiful in the West. The territories are desperate for educated people willing to build something new. And are you building something new?" Vivian considered the question. "I'm trying. The children here deserve a good education, regardless of where they live." "Noble of you." "Not really. It's selfish too. I needed a fresh start away from whispers and pitying looks." Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. "We're not so different, you and I." The observation hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement of shared experience that created a bond stronger than Vivian had expected to form with anyone in Eldorado Canyon, let alone this man with his mysterious past. "No," she agreed quietly. "Perhaps we're not." They remained by the spring until the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, talking of inconsequential things, favorite books, memories of eastern cities, the peculiarities of Eldorado Canyon's citizens. When at last they mounted their horses for the return journey, Vivian felt a curious reluctance to see the day end. As they rode back toward town, Jack asked, "Would you be interested in continuing your riding lessons? Next Sunday, perhaps?" "I would," Vivian replied, surprised by how much she meant it. "Thank you." The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant pattern. Vivian taught at the schoolhouse during the week, attended church on Sunday mornings, and spent Sunday afternoons with Jack, gradually improving her riding skills. Their conversations deepened, revealing more of their respective pasts and hopes for the future. Jack's business began to take shape as well. He purchased several mares and a stallion, the beginning of what he hoped would become a respected breeding operation. Word spread about his skill with horses, and local ranchers started bringing him animals to train or problematic cases for assessment. As summer gave way to early autumn, Vivian found herself looking forward to their Sunday rides with increasing anticipation. They explored the countryside around Eldorado Canyon, discovering hidden canyons, abandoned mining claims, and scenic overlooks with views that took her breath away. It was during one such ride in late September that Jack brought her to a ridge overlooking his property. From this vantage point, she could see the modest cabin he had built, the corral beside it, and the pastures where his small herd grazed. "What do you think?" he asked as they sat side by side on a flat boulder. "It's wonderful," Vivian said sincerely. "You've accomplished so much in such a short time. There's still a lot to do. The cabin needs work before winter, the north pasture needs fencing, and I'm still looking for the right horses to expand the herd. But you're happy with your progress." Jack smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I am, more than I expected to be when I came back." "Why did you come back?" Vivian asked, the question that had lingered in her mind since their first meeting finally finding voice. "If you left under difficult circumstances, why return to Eldorado Canyon specifically?" Jack was silent for a long moment, his gaze on the land spread out below them. "To make things right," he said finally. "There were people I wronged before I left, debts unpaid, not just money but trust. Honor, and have you made things right, working on it?" He turned to look at her then, his expression serious. "There's something you should know, Vivian, something the gossips probably haven't told you yet." The use of her first name, rare in their interactions, caught her attention as much as the gravity of his tone. "What is it?" "Before I left Eldorado Canyon, I was engaged to Alina Wilcox, the ranch owner's daughter, broke it off just before I disappeared." Vivian felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. "I see." "No, you don't," Jack said gently. "I didn't love her. The engagement was her father's idea, a way to bind me to the ranch permanently. I agreed because I was young and thought it was my only option for advancement." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Alina married Thomas Jenkins 2 years ago and moved to California. But her father, William Wilcox, still owns the Flying W, and he still blames me for his daughter's broken heart." Vivian frowned, trying to understand the implications. "Is he causing trouble for you now?" "Not yet. But the railroad route we discussed at the town meeting. The most direct path crosses both my land and his. And Wilcox has been telling people he'll refuse permission for the tracks to cross his property if I'm involved in any way." "That's absurd," Vivian said, indignant on Jack's behalf. "He would hurt the entire town just to spite you. Wilcox is a proud man and a powerful one. He donated the land for the courthouse and the church. Half the town owes him favors or money. What will you do?" Jack shrugged, though the tension in his shoulders belied the casual gesture. "Keep building my business, try to stay out of Wilcox's way, hope he comes around for the good of the town, and if he doesn't, then I'll cross that bridge when I come to it." They sat in silence for a time, the implications of Jack's revelation hanging in the air between them. Vivian understood now why he had been hesitant at the town meeting, why he seemed both committed to Eldorado Canyon and somehow apart from it. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. Jack's hand found hers on the sun-warmed stone, his fingers closing gently around hers. "I didn't want you hearing it from someone else. Not when," he stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "Not when what?" Vivian prompted, her heart beating faster at his touch. "Not when you've become important to me," he finished quietly. The simple declaration sent warmth spreading through her chest. "You've become important to me too, Jack." His smile then was worth every moment of uncertainty she had felt since arriving in Eldorado Canyon. And when he leaned forward, his intent clear in his eyes, Vivian closed the distance between them, meeting his kiss with a response that surprised even herself in its certainty. The kiss was brief but tender, a promise rather than a demand. When they parted, Jack's eyes searched hers, finding no regret, only a reflection of his own feelings. "I should get you back to town," he said, though he made no move to rise. "People will talk." Vivian laughed softly. "People already talk, Jack. It's what people do in small towns." "And does that bother you, what they might say about us?" She considered the question seriously. In Philadelphia, her reputation had been everything carefully cultivated and jealously guarded, but here, in this place where she had come to reinvent herself. "No," she decided, "it doesn't bother me." "Does it bother you?" "Only if it causes problems for you at the school. The school board hired me for my qualifications, not my personal life. As long as I teach the children well, they have no grounds for complaint." Jack stood, pulling her gently to her feet. "You're a remarkable woman, Vivian Palmer. "And you," she replied with a smile, "are a remarkable man, Jack Norris, even if your past is somewhat checkered." He laughed at that, a free, unguarded sound that made her heart lift. As they mounted their horses for the ride back to town, Vivian felt lighter than she had in years, as if something that had been knotted tight inside her was finally beginning to loosen. The confrontation with William Wilcox came sooner than either of them had anticipated. Just 2 days after their ride to the ridge, Vivian was in the general store when the rancher entered, accompanied by two of his hands. A large man with silver streaking his dark beard, Wilcox commanded attention merely by his presence. "Miss Palmer," he greeted her with a curt nod. "I understand you've been keeping company with Jack Norris." Vivian stiffened at his presumption but maintained her composure. "Mr. Wilcox, yes, Mr. Norris has been kind enough to teach me to ride. Has he now? Mighty neighborly of him." Wilcox's tone made the words an insult rather than a compliment. "You might want to reconsider your choice of instructor. Norris isn't the most reliable sort." "I've found him perfectly reliable," Vivian replied coolly, aware that Mr. Higgins and several other customers were listening with undisguised interest. "Then you don't know him very well." Wilcox stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Ask him about the money he took when he left town. Ask him why he really came back." Before Vivian could respond, the door opened again and Jack himself walked in. He stopped short at the sight of Wilcox, his expression hardening. "William," he said evenly. "Been a long time, not long enough," Wilcox replied. "Just telling Miss Palmer here about your history in Eldorado Canyon." "I'm sure you were." Jack's gaze shifted to Vivian, concern evident in his eyes. "Everything all right?" "Perfectly," she assured him, moving to stand beside him in a deliberate show of solidarity. Mr. Wilcox was just expressing his opinion about riding instructors. Jack's mouth quirked slightly at her composure. "Was he now?" Wilcox looked between them, his expression darkening. "You're making a mistake, Miss Palmer. Norris here abandoned my daughter without a word. Took money from my safe before he left. Now he's back, buying land that conveniently sits on the proposed railroad route." "That's enough, William," Jack said, his voice low but firm. "Your quarrel is with me, not Miss Palmer." "My quarrel is with anyone fool enough to trust you," Wilcox retorted. "The town should know what kind of man they're dealing with." "The town already knows," Mr. Higgins interjected unexpectedly. "Been 3 months since Jack returned. If he meant trouble, we'd have seen it by now." Wilcox glared at the storekeeper, then back at Jack. "This isn't over. That railroad won't cross my land if you're involved, Norris. Remember that." With a final contemptuous look, he strode out of the store, his men following behind. In the silence that followed his departure, Jack turned to Vivian. "I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean for you to be drawn into this." "It's hardly your fault," she replied, though her mind was racing with Wilcox's accusations. Had Jack really stolen money before leaving town? As if reading her thoughts, Jack said quietly, "We should talk, but not here." Mr. Higgins, demonstrating the tact that had made his store the social center of Eldorado Canyon, busied himself with arranging goods on a distant shelf, giving them a semblance of privacy. "I still need to purchase a few things," Vivian said, indicating her half-filled basket. "I'll wait outside," Jack told her. "Take your time." She completed her shopping as quickly as propriety allowed, her mind filled with questions. When she emerged from the store, Jack was waiting beside his horse, his expression troubled. "Walk with me?" he asked, offering his arm. Vivian nodded, placing her hand on his sleeve. They moved down the street toward the schoolhouse, where fewer people would overhear their conversation. "Wilcox said you took money from his safe," Vivian said once they were out of earshot of passers-by. Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I did, but it wasn't theft, it was my wages. 3 months' worth that he'd been holding for me, supposedly for safekeeping. When I decided to leave, I knew he wouldn't give it to me willingly, not after I broke off the engagement with a leaner." "So you took it?" "I took what was mine by right," Jack corrected. "Not a penny more. I left a note explaining exactly how much I was taking and why." Vivian studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. "And that's the truth, all of it. That's the truth," Jack confirmed. "I've done things I'm not proud of, Vivian, but I'm not a thief." She believed him, she realized. Despite the short time she had known him, despite Wilcox's accusations, she trusted Jack Norris more than she had trusted anyone in a very long time. "What will you do about the railroad?" she asked. "If Wilcox refuses to allow it across his land." The route could be altered to avoid his property entirely, but it would add cost and time to the construction. The railroad company might decide it's not worth the trouble and choose Ruby Valley instead, which would hurt Eldorado Canyon. Significantly, Jack agreed. The town needs that railroad connection to grow. They had reached the schoolhouse, a quiet sanctuary at this hour with the children long since gone home. Vivian unlocked the door and they stepped inside, the familiar smell of chalk dust and books enveloping them. "Will you talk to Mayor Williams?" Vivian asked, setting her purchases on her desk. "Explain the situation. I've already told him what I could expect from Wilcox, but the mayor still hopes he'll come around for the good of the town." "And you don't believe he will?" Jack shook his head. "Wilcox holds grudges. He's had 3 years to get over what happened with Alina, and he's still just as angry." Vivian moved to stand before him, placing her hands on his chest in a gesture that felt both bold and natural. "Then we'll find another way. We." Jack raised an eyebrow, his hands coming up to rest lightly on her waist. "Yes, we," Vivian affirmed. "I may be relatively new to Eldorado Canyon, but I've grown fond of this place, and I've grown very fond of you, Jack Norris, questionable past and all." The smile that transformed his face then was worth any risk to her reputation. "Have you now?" he murmured, drawing her closer. "Very fond indeed," Vivian repeated, tilting her face up to his. This kiss was different from the one they had shared on the ridge, deeper, more urgent, a ceiling of something that had been building between them since that first day when her skirt had tangled in the wagon wheel. Vivian lost herself in it, in the warmth of Jack's arms around her, in the certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. When they finally parted, Jack rested his forehead against hers, his breath coming quicker than usual. "We should stop," he said reluctantly. "Before someone sees and your reputation is completely ruined." "My reputation has survived worse than being kissed by a handsome horse trainer," Vivian assured him, though she did step back slightly, conscious of the schoolhouse windows. "Has it now?" Jack's eyes sparkled with humor. "I'd like to hear that story sometime. Perhaps I'll tell you," she teased. "Over dinner, tomorrow night." "Are you asking me to court you properly, Miss Palmer?" "I believe I am, Mr. Norris." Jack took her hand, raising it to his lips for a courtly kiss. "Then I accept with pleasure." "Shall I call for you at 6? 6 would be perfect." As Jack departed, promising to see her the next evening, Vivian found herself smiling despite the complications that Wilcox's animosity might bring. She had come to the West seeking independence, a chance to rebuild her life on her own terms. Love had not been part of her plan. But now, as she watched Jack ride away, she couldn't imagine her life in Eldorado Canyon without him. The following weeks were a delicate balance of private joy and public scrutiny. Jack courted Vivian with a blend of frontier practicality and Eastern gallantry that she found irresistible. They rode together on Sundays, dined together at the Silverton Hotel's restaurant when propriety demanded a public setting, and spent quiet evenings on Vivian's porch when it did not. The children at school, ever perceptive, noticed the change in their teacher. 12-year-old Sarah Mitchell asked directly one afternoon if Miss Palmer was going to marry Mr. Norris. Vivian had deflected the question with a reminder about fractions, but the incident reminded her that in a town like Eldorado Canyon, nothing remained private for long. Not everyone approved of their developing relationship. Some, like William Wilcox, openly discouraged it. Others, particularly older women who had witnessed Jack's previous courtship of Alina, warned Vivian about trusting a man with his history. But for every critic, there seemed to be someone who supported them: Mr. Higgins, Sheriff Miller, and many of the parents of her students who had benefited from Jack's skill with their livestock. Meanwhile, the railroad question hung over the town like a storm cloud. The representative from the Central Pacific arrived as scheduled in mid-October, a dapper man named Harrison who spent a week surveying the proposed route and meeting with local landowners. The final meeting was held at the courthouse, with the entire town in attendance. After careful consideration, Harrison announced, the Central Pacific finds that a route through Eldorado Canyon would indeed serve our interests, connecting the mines here to our main line. However, he paused, looking directly at William Wilcox. This route would need to cross several private properties. Most owners have expressed their willingness to negotiate reasonable compensation. And some have not, Wilcox interjected, standing from his seat in the front row. I will not have those tracks cutting through the Flying W, not under any circumstances. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The Flying W occupied a critical section of the proposed route, a relatively flat passage through otherwise rough terrain. Mr. Wilcox, Harrison said diplomatically, the railroad is prepared to offer very generous terms. It's not about the money, Wilcox interrupted. It's about principle. And my principle is that I won't do business with anyone associated with Jack Norris. All eyes turned to Jack, who sat beside Vivian near the back of the room. He met their gazes steadily, but Vivian could feel the tension in his body. Mayor Williams stepped forward, his expression grave. William, this affects the entire town, not just your personal grievances. Surely we can find a compromise. There is no compromise, Wilcox insisted. Either find another route or build your railroad through Ruby Valley. That's my final word. With that, he strode out of the courthouse, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Harrison cleared his throat. Well, this does present a challenge. We'll need to reassess our options. The meeting dissolved into smaller groups, with townspeople discussing the implications of Wilcox's stance. Jack and Vivian slipped out quietly, walking through the twilight toward her house. I'm sorry, Vivian said once they were alone. His hatred seemed so disproportionate to what happened. Jack shook his head. It's not just about Alina or the money. Wilcox has always needed to control everything around him. When I left the way I did, I defied that control. He can't forgive that. They reached Vivian's gate, but instead of saying goodnight, Jack said, Come riding with me tomorrow after school. There's something I want to show you. What is it? An idea, maybe a solution. His expression was thoughtful, almost calculating. Do you trust me? You know I do. Then come with me tomorrow. Wear your riding clothes. The next day, after dismissing her students, Vivian changed quickly into her split skirt and met Jack at the livery as arranged. They rode out of town, but instead of taking their usual trail toward Jack's property or the spring, they headed northwest into rougher country. After an hour's ride, they crested a ridge and Jack reined in his horse. Below them stretched a narrow valley, unremarkable except for the stream that wound through it. What do you see? Jack asked. Vivian studied the landscape. A valley, some trees along the stream, rocky soil. What you can't see is that this valley cuts through the foothills for nearly 10 miles before joining up with the main route from Virginia City. It's a natural passage, not as flat as going through the Flying W, but manageable, understanding dawned. An alternative route for the railroad. Jack nodded. It would add about 3 miles to the total length, and they'd need to build a bridge over the stream, but it bypasses Wilcox's land entirely. Whose land is this? Technically, it belongs to the federal government, part of the public domain. But I've staked a claim on the southern portion. Jack pointed to a set of marker posts visible in the distance. The railroad would need to negotiate with me and whoever claims the northern section. Vivian looked at him with new appreciation. You've been planning this. Considering it as an option, Jack corrected. I was hoping Wilcox would be reasonable for the town's sake, but since he's not. Will the railroad company accept this alternative? They might, if it means avoiding a prolonged legal battle with Wilcox, and if the town shows unified support. They dismounted, leading their horses down a steep path to the valley floor. Up close, Vivian could better assess the terrain, challenging for construction, certainly, but not impossible. What can I do to help? She asked as they walked alongside the stream. Jack stopped, taking both her hands in his. Just stand with me. Some people might say I'm doing this for personal gain to increase the value of my claim. Are you? His eyes held her steadily. Partly, I won't lie about that, but I also believe in Eldorado Canyon's future, and my future here. He squeezed her hands gently. With you, if you'll have me. Vivian's heart swelled at the unspoken proposal in his words. Jack, I know it's soon, he said quickly. We've only known each other a few months, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." "Nor have I," Vivian admitted, surprising herself with the truth of it. "But there's still so much uncertainty: the railroad, your business, Wilcox's influence. Life is always uncertain, especially out here. That's why we have to seize happiness when we find it." Jack pulled her closer, his voice dropping. "I love you, Vivian Palmer. I think I've loved you since you stood in that dusty street with your skirt tangled in the wheel, looking so beautifully out of place, and yet so determined to belong." Tears pricked at Vivian's eyes, unexpected emotion welling up at his declaration. "I love you too," she whispered, the words falling naturally from her lips. "Despite all the reasons I shouldn't, despite all the warnings and my own plans for independence, I love you." His kiss then was tender, a sealing of promises made. When they parted, the setting sun cast long shadows across the valley, turning the landscape golden. "We should head back," Jack said reluctantly. "It'll be dark soon." As they mounted their horses for the return journey, Vivian felt a certainty settling within her. Whatever challenges lay ahead: Wilcox's opposition, the town's gossip, the railroad's decision, she and Jack would face them together. The alternative railroad route quickly became the talk of Eldorado Canyon. Jack presented his findings to Mayor Williams and Harrison from the Central Pacific, who dispatched surveyors to assess its feasibility. The initial reports were cautiously optimistic. The route presented engineering challenges, but no insurmountable obstacles. William Wilcox, predictably, was furious. He stormed into the mayor's office the day after the survey team began work, demanding the town withdraw support from Norris's scheme. When the mayor refused, Wilcox threatened to call in loans from several prominent businesses, including the Silverton Hotel and the Silver Strike Saloon. For a tense week, the town seemed divided between those who supported the alternative route and those who feared Wilcox's economic power. Jack continued his work with the horses, outwardly calm but privately concerned about the pressure being applied to his supporters. Vivian found herself increasingly drawn into the conflict as well. Mrs. Prescott, mother of one of her students and wife of a rancher who owed money to Wilcox, suggested during a parent meeting that perhaps Miss Palmer's personal entanglements were affecting her judgment regarding town matters. "My personal life has no bearing on my teaching," Vivian had replied firmly. "Nor does it influence my belief that Eldorado Canyon needs that railroad connection to thrive." The confrontation left her shaken, but more determined than ever to stand by Jack. That evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset, she told him about the incident. "I'm sorry," Jack said, his expression troubled. "I never meant to make things difficult for you here." "You haven't," Vivian assured him. "If anything, you've made this place feel like home in a way I never expected." She hesitated, then added, "But I am concerned about Wilcox's influence, if he succeeds in turning the town against the alternative route." "He won't," Jack said with quiet confidence. "Not everyone fears him as much as he thinks they do, and Harrison seemed genuinely interested in the valley route." "What if he tries something more direct? Against you or your property?" Jack's expression hardened. "Wilcox may be vindictive, but he's not foolish enough to cross that line." The sheriff wouldn't stand for it, nor would most of the town. Despite his reassurance, Vivian couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. Wilcox had invested too much of his pride in this conflict to back down easily. Something would have to give. The breaking point came 2 weeks later, on a blustery November evening. Jack had been working late, training a difficult horse for one of the outlying ranches. As he returned to his cabin in the gathering darkness, he spotted the glow of flames against the night sky coming from the direction of his barn. Spurring thunder to a gallop, he raced toward the fire. By the time he arrived, the barn was fully engulfed, flames licking hungrily at the dry timber. Jack worked desperately to free the horses trapped inside, managing to save all but one, a yearling colt that had been overcome by smoke before he could reach it. As he stood watching the barn collapse, soot-stained and heartsick, Sheriff Miller arrived with several townsmen who had seen the flames from Eldorado Canyon. "What happened?" the sheriff demanded. "Don't know," Jack said grimly. "It was already burning when I got here." One of the men, a miner named Peterson, approached from the far side of the smoldering ruins. "Found these," he said, holding up an empty whiskey bottle with a rag stuffed in its neck. "Somebody did this deliberate." Sheriff Miller took the makeshift torch, his expression darkening. "Arson." "Any idea who would want to do this to you, Jack?" Jack's jaw tightened. "I can think of one person with motive." "Wilcox," the sheriff sighed. "That's a serious accusation. You got any proof?" "Just the timing, and the fact that he's made no secret of wanting me gone." Miller nodded slowly. "I'll have a talk with him, but without witnesses." "I understand," Jack said, his gaze returning to the ruins of his barn. "Just wanted it on record." After the sheriff and the others had gone, promising to return in the morning to help with cleanup, Jack began the process of settling his surviving horses in the corral. The fire had destroyed not only the barn but all his feed supplies, most of his tack, and the yearling colt that had shown such promise. It was well past midnight when he finally made his way to his cabin, exhausted and heartsick. To his surprise, he found Vivian waiting on his porch, a lantern burning beside her. "I heard about the fire," she said, rising to meet him. "Are you all right?" "I've been better," he admitted, accepting her embrace despite his smoke-stained clothes. "Lost the barn, some equipment. And one of the colts." "I'm so sorry, Jack." Vivian's arms tightened around him. "The sheriff thinks it was deliberate, found evidence of it. No way to prove who did it, though." Vivian pulled back to look at him, her expression resolute in the lantern light. "Wilcox has gone too far. The town needs to know what kind of man he really is." "The town already suspects," Jack said wearily. "But suspicion isn't proof. And Wilcox has friends in Carson City, judges, lawmakers. Even if we could prove he was behind this, he'd likely escape any serious consequences." "Then what do we do?" Jack sat heavily on the porch steps, the events of the night catching up with him. "I don't know. Rebuild, I suppose. Keep fighting for the alternative route. Hope the railroad company decides it's worth the extra work." Vivian sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. "I've been thinking about what you said, about seizing happiness when we find it. Have you now?" Despite his exhaustion, Jack felt a flicker of interest at her tone. "Yes, and I've decided you're right." She turned to face him fully, her expression serious in the lantern light. "I don't want to wait anymore, Jack. Life is too uncertain, as tonight has proven. If your offer still stands, I want to marry you. Soon." For the first time since discovering the fire, Jack smiled. "My offer definitely still stands, but are you sure? This isn't exactly the most auspicious moment." "I'm sure," Vivian said firmly. "Besides, if we're married, my savings can help rebuild the barn, and before you protest about pride or propriety, remember that in marriage, what's yours is mine and what's mine is yours." Jack laughed softly, pulling her close. "You're a remarkable woman, Vivian Palmer, and I would be honored to make you my wife, barn or no barn." They sat together on the porch until dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, making plans for both their wedding and the rebuilding of Jack's business. When Vivian finally rode back to town, she carried with her not only Jack's ring, a simple silver band that had belonged to his mother, but also a renewed determination to secure Eldorado Canyon's future, with or without William Wilcox's cooperation. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Eldorado Canyon, overshadowing even the barn fire for a day or two. Most reactions were positive congratulations from Vivian's students and their parents, a bottle of good whiskey from Sheriff Miller, a small party organized by the ladies of the church. But there were also disapproving glances and whispered concerns about Vivian's judgment in marrying a man with Jack's complicated history. Meanwhile, the investigation into the barn fire yielded little concrete evidence. Sheriff Miller questioned Wilcox, who denied any involvement, and produced witnesses who claimed he had been playing poker at the Silver Strike Saloon when the fire must have been set. Without proof to the contrary, the sheriff could take no action. The railroad survey continued, with Harrison's team completing their assessment of the valley route by the end of November. Their final report indicated that while construction would be more costly than the original plan through the Flying W, the alternative was viable and would still provide the economic benefits Eldorado Canyon sought. "The company will make its decision after the new year," Harrison informed the town council at their December meeting. In the meantime, I would encourage all parties to consider their positions carefully. The railroad prefers to work with communities that present a unified front. This thinly veiled warning was directed at Wilcox, who sat stony-faced throughout the meeting. Afterward, as people filed out of the courthouse, he confronted Jack directly for the first time since the barn fire. "Think you're clever, don't you?" he said, stepping into Jack's path. "Finding another route, turning the town against me." "I didn't turn anyone against you, William," Jack replied evenly. "You've done that all on your own." Wilcox's face darkened. "This isn't over, Norris, not by a long shot." "Actually, I think it is," said a new voice. Eleanor Wilcox Jenkins stood in the courthouse doorway, her expression determined. Beside her was a tall man whom Jack recognized as Thomas Jenkins, her husband. Wilcox turned, shock replacing anger on his face. "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" "Mother wrote to me about what's been happening," Eleanor said, moving to stand between her father and Jack. "About the railroad dispute, the barn fire, all of it. She's worried about you, father, we both are." "You shouldn't have come," Wilcox said gruffly. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns our entire family when you're willing to hurt an entire town just to pursue a vendetta." Eleanor turned to Jack. "Mr. Norris, it's been a long time." "Mrs. Jenkins," Jack acknowledged with a nod. "You're looking well. As are you." She smiled slightly, then returned her attention to her father. "This has to stop, father. Jack didn't steal from you, he took wages he had earned. And he didn't break my heart, we both knew the engagement wasn't based on love." Wilcox's jaw tightened. He left without a word. "Disappeared in the night like a thief." "Because you threatened to have him arrested if he tried to leave openly," Eleanor countered. "Mother told me everything. How you pressured Jack into the engagement, how you kept his wages to ensure he couldn't leave, how you promised to ruin him if he broke things off with me." The courthouse had emptied by now, leaving only the four of them in the dimly lit building. Thomas Jenkins stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on his wife's shoulder. "Mr. Wilcox," he said formally, "my wife and I have a vested interest in Eldorado Canyon's prosperity. My family's freight business would benefit greatly from the railroad connection. We're asking you to set aside this grudge for the good of all concerned." Wilcox looked between his daughter and son-in-law, then at Jack, his expression unreadable. "You put them up to this," he accused. "I had no idea they were coming," Jack said truthfully. "Haven't had any contact with Eleanor since I left." "It's true, father," Eleanor confirmed. "We came because Mother is worried about you. This obsession with punishing Jack is consuming you. It's time to let it go." For a long moment, Wilcox said nothing. Then, with a muttered curse, he stormed past them and out of the courthouse, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. Eleanor sighed. "I'm sorry, Jack. I had hoped he would listen to reason." "It was worth trying," Jack said. "Thank you for coming." "We'll stay in town for a few days," Thomas said. "Try to talk to him again when he's calmed down. If nothing else, we can testify to the railroad company about the true situation." After Eleanor and her husband departed, Jack found Vivian waiting outside the courthouse, concern evident in her expression. "Was that Eleanor?" she asked, having glimpsed the woman as she left. Jack nodded. "And her husband, they came to try to reason with Wilcox. And did they succeed?" "Not yet, but it's the first time anyone has confronted him with the truth about what happened 3 years ago. It might make a difference." They walked arm in arm through the crisp December evening, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. Christmas decorations adorned the storefronts along the main street, bringing a festive atmosphere despite the underlying tension in the town. "When exactly did you want to get married?" Jack asked, changing the subject to a happier topic. "You mentioned soon that night at my cabin, but we haven't set a date." Vivian smiled up at him. "I was thinking Christmas Eve. The school will be on break, and it would give us something joyful to celebrate regardless of what happens with the railroad decision." "Christmas Eve sounds perfect," Jack agreed, "though I should warn you that my cabin is hardly a palace, and with the barn still being rebuilt." "I don't need a palace, Jack, just you." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. In the light from the nearby shop windows, her face glowed with a happiness that made his heart ache with love for her. Have I told you today how grateful I am that your skirt got tangled in that wagon wheel? Vivian laughed, a sound that never failed to delight him. Not today, no. Well, I am. Incredibly grateful. He leaned down to kiss her, unconcerned with who might be watching. And I promise to remind you of that fact every day for the rest of our lives. The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of activity. Jack focused on rebuilding his barn, assisted by several townspeople who volunteered their labor in a show of support that touched him deeply. The new structure began to take shape, sturdier and more practical than the old one. Vivian divided her time between teaching, preparing for the school's Christmas pageant, and making arrangements for the wedding. She wrote to her aunt in Philadelphia, sharing her news and half expecting disapproval. To her surprise, Aunt Margaret's reply was warmly congratulatory, with a promise to send a wedding gift and a request for a visit, once the railroad makes the journey less arduous. Eleanor and Thomas Jenkins remained in Eldorado Canyon, staying at the Silverton Hotel while they continued their efforts to reconcile with William Wilcox. Their presence added an unexpected dimension to the town's social dynamics. Eleanor, far from being the heartbroken, jilted fiancée that rumors had portrayed, was a confident, happily married woman who seemed genuinely pleased about Jack and Vivian's engagement. "Jack deserves happiness," she told Vivian over tea at the hotel's restaurant, "and so do you. I hope my father will eventually see that his vendetta is hurting only himself." "Has he spoken to you at all?" Vivian asked. Eleanor sighed. "Briefly. He's still angry that we came, still convinced that Jack somehow wronged him, but Thomas and I will keep trying. The railroad decision is too important to the town's future to let personal grudges interfere." The wedding was planned as a simple ceremony at the church on Christmas Eve, followed by a celebration at the schoolhouse. Nearly everyone in town received an invitation, including William Wilcox, a gesture of reconciliation that Jack had initially resisted but eventually agreed to. "He won't come," Jack predicted as they addressed the invitations one evening at Vivian's house. "Probably not," Vivian conceded. "But extending the invitation is the right thing to do. It shows we're willing to put the past behind us, even if he isn't." The morning of Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, with a dusting of fresh snow that transformed Eldorado Canyon into a winter wonderland. Vivian awoke early, a mixture of excitement and nerves fluttering in her stomach. By sunset, she would be Mrs. Jack Norris, a transformation she had never anticipated when she arrived in Nevada less than a year ago. The wedding dress hung ready, not the elaborate gown she might have worn in Philadelphia, but a simple creation of ivory silk that Mrs. Henderson had made with loving care. Beside it was the blue velvet cloak Jack had ordered from Carson City as a surprise, delivered just the day before. As the afternoon approached, Vivian's small house filled with women from the town who had come to help her prepare, arranging her hair, pressing her dress, offering advice both practical and fanciful about married life. Their genuine affection touched Vivian deeply, confirming that she had indeed found a home in this rough, edged frontier town. "It's time," announced Mrs. Higgins at last, helping Vivian into the blue cloak. "The church is full and your groom is waiting." The short walk to the church seemed both endless and instantaneous. Snow crunched beneath Vivian's boots, the winter air crisp against her cheeks. As she approached the church steps, Sheriff Miller stepped forward to escort her inside a role traditionally performed by the father of the bride, but which the sheriff had offered to fulfill in the absence of Vivian's family. Inside, the church glowed with candlelight, its simple interior transformed by evergreen boughs and red ribbons. The pews were filled with familiar faces, her students and their parents, shopkeepers and miners, ranchers and their wives. And at the altar, waiting beside Reverend Thompson, stood Jack, more handsome than ever in a new black suit, his expression one of barely contained joy as he watched her approach. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, traditional vows spoken with genuine emotion. When Jack slipped the simple gold band onto Vivian's finger, his hands were steady, his eyes never leaving hers. And when Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was both a promise and a fulfillment. The celebration afterward at the schoolhouse was everything a frontier wedding should be: abundant food provided by the townspeople, music from local musicians, dancing that continued well into the night. Jack and Vivian moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, both acutely aware of their good fortune in having found each other. It was nearing midnight when the schoolhouse door opened, admitting a gust of cold air and an unexpected guest, William Wilcox, accompanied by Eleanor and Thomas. A hush fell over the gathering as Wilcox made his way toward the newlyweds. Jack instinctively moved closer to Vivian, protective despite the public setting. Wilcox stopped before them, his expression unreadable. "Norris," he said gruffly. "Mrs. Norris." "William," Jack acknowledged cautiously. "Glad you could make it." Wilcox cleared his throat. "Eleanor and Thomas have been persistent in their arguments, and my wife hasn't given me a moment's peace since they arrived." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I've been outnumbered." "About what exactly?" Jack asked. "About the railroad, about the past." Wilcox sighed heavily. "I'm not a man who admits mistakes easily, Norris, but I may have misjudged certain situations." It was as close to an apology as the proud rancher was likely to offer. Jack recognized it for the concession it was. "Water under the bridge," he said, extending his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Wilcox shook it firmly. "I've informed Harrison that the Flying W will cooperate with the railroad's original route plan. No need for that difficult valley passage after all." A murmur of surprise and relief rippled through the gathered townspeople. Mayor Williams, who had been hovering nearby, stepped forward with a beaming smile. "That's wonderful news, William. The town council will be delighted to hear it." Wilcox nodded curtly, then turned back to Jack and Vivian. "Consider it a wedding present. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe there's some punch over there." As he moved away, Eleanor approached, smiling warmly. "Congratulations, both of you. I think this might be the beginning of a new chapter for everyone in Eldorado Canyon." "Thank you for your part in it," Vivian said sincerely. "Family can reach people in ways others can't," Eleanor replied. "And despite his stubborn pride, Father does care about this town and its future." As the celebration resumed, Jack drew Vivian into a quiet corner. "Well, Mrs. Norris," he said, his arms encircling her waist. "It seems we've had quite the eventful wedding day. A ceremony, a celebration, and a resolution to the railroad dispute all in one evening." "I couldn't have asked for more perfect gifts," Vivian agreed, leaning into his embrace. "Although I still can't quite believe Wilcox relented." "The man has his pride, but he's not a fool. He knows the railroad will benefit his ranch as much as the rest of the town." Jack brushed a strand of hair from her face, his expression softening. "But enough about Wilcox and railroads. This is our wedding night, and I have other things on my mind entirely." Vivian felt a blush warming her cheeks, but her smile was full of anticipation. "As do I, husband, as do I." Later that night, as they rode toward Jack's cabin, their cabin now snowflakes began to fall gently from the sky, adding to the magic of the evening. Despite the cold, Vivian felt warm within the circle of Jack's arm as they shared his horse, her own mount following behind with their belongings. "Happy?" Jack asked softly as the lights of Eldorado Canyon receded behind them. "Completely," Vivian assured him, tilting her face up for a kiss. "It's not the life I imagined for myself when I left Philadelphia, but it's far better than anything I could have dreamed. Even with barn fires and railroad disputes and stubborn ranchers. Even with all of that, because it's our life, Jack, together." As they approached the cabin, now visible in the moonlight, Vivian reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment: her parents' death, her financial ruin, her journey west, and most importantly, that fateful day when her skirt had tangled in a wagon wheel and a blue-eyed stranger had said, "Easy now, you're free." He had freed her indeed, though not in the way either of them had imagined at the time. Freed her to love, to risk, to build a life that was both challenging and deeply satisfying. And as Jack lifted her from the horse and carried her across the threshold of their home, Vivian knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Spring came to Eldorado Canyon in a rush of wildflowers and new beginnings. The railroad construction began in March of 1877, with crews laying track westward from the main line. The sound of hammers and the shouts of workmen became a familiar backdrop to daily life, a constant reminder of the town's bright future. For Jack and Vivian, the months since their Christmas Eve wedding had been a time of adjustment and deepening love. They settled into a routine that accommodated both their careers, Vivian continuing to teach at the schoolhouse in town, Jack expanding his horse breeding operation on their property. The newly rebuilt barn now housed a growing collection of quality stock, including several promising foals born that spring. Their home had expanded as well. With Vivian's encouragement and practical assistance, Jack had added 2 rooms to the original cabin, creating a comfortable dwelling that combined frontier practicality with touches of Eastern refinement. Vivian's books lined shelves that Jack had built. Her piano, shipped at great expense from Philadelphia, occupied a corner of the main room, and her feminine influence was evident in the curtains, quilts, and small decorative items that transformed the bachelor cabin into a true home. On a warm Saturday in late May, they hosted a gathering to celebrate both the progress of the railroad and their 5 months of marriage. The guests included many from Town Sheriff Miller and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. Higgins, Mayor Williams, and several of Vivian's students and their parents. Even William Wilcox and his wife attended, a sign of the continuing thaw in relations since Christmas Eve. As the afternoon sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the yard, Jack found Vivian standing apart from their guests, gazing toward the distant mountains with a thoughtful expression. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Norris," he said, coming to stand beside her. Vivian smiled, leaning into him as his arm circled her waist. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in a year. Last May, I had just arrived in Eldorado Canyon, knowing no one, uncertain of my decision to come west. Having second thoughts," Jack teased, knowing the answer. "Not one," Vivian assured him, turning to face him fully. "In fact, I have some news that makes me even more certain of our future here." Something in her tone made Jack study her face more carefully. "News?" Vivian took his hand, guiding it to rest against her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby, Jack, in November, according to Dr. Wilson." For a moment, Jack simply stared at her, processing the information. Then a grin of pure joy spread across his face. "A baby, you're sure?" The doctor confirmed it yesterday. "I wanted to tell you privately before sharing the news with everyone else." Jack pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his exuberance. "Vivian, that's wonderful, a baby." He set her down gently, suddenly concerned. "Are you feeling all right? Should you be resting instead of hosting this gathering?" Vivian laughed at his sudden protectiveness. "I'm perfectly fine, Jack. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, and most of them worked right up until the day they delivered." "Yes, but not all of them are my wife," Jack pointed out, his hand returning to her stomach with a kind of wonder. "Not all of them are carrying my child." The tenderness in his voice brought tears to Vivian's eyes. "I love you, Jack Norris," she said softly, "and our child will love you too." "Our child," Jack repeated, the words filling him with a sense of awe and responsibility. "I never thought I'd have a family of my own, after the way I left things with my father." "This is your chance to be the kind of father you wished you had," Vivian said, understanding his unspoken concern. "And you will be, Jack, I know it." They rejoined their guests, keeping their news private for the moment, though Vivian noticed Mrs. Higgins watching her with knowing eyes. The older woman had raised 6 children of her own and likely recognized the signs that Vivian herself had initially missed. As the evening progressed and their guests began to depart, William Wilcox approached them, his manner still formal but lacking the hostility of months past. "Fine place you've built here, Norris," he said, gesturing toward the expanded cabin and the new barn. "Done a lot with it in a short time." "Thank you," Jack replied. "We've been fortunate." Wilcox nodded, his gaze shifting to include Vivian. "The railroad will reach town by September, according to Harrison. Already seeing benefits, new businesses inquiring about locations, more travelers coming through." "That's wonderful news," Vivian said sincerely. "It is." Wilcox hesitated, then continued gruffly, I may have been short-sighted about certain matters. The town's prosperity benefits us all. Coming from Wilcox, this was as close to a full apology as they were likely to get. Jack extended his hand, and after a brief pause, the rancher shook it firmly. Water under the bridge, Jack said, repeating his words from their Christmas Eve encounter. We're all looking forward now, not back. As the last of their guests departed and twilight deepened into night, Jack and Vivian stood on their porch, arms around each other, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Happy? Jack asked, echoing his question from their wedding night. Completely, Vivian assured him, resting her head against his shoulder. And you, more than I ever thought possible. Jack placed a gentle hand on her stomach where their child grew, a tangible symbol of their future together. When your skirt got tangled in that wheel last summer, I had no idea I was freeing my own heart as well as your dress. Vivian turned in his arms, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. We freed each other, I think, and now we're building something wonderful together. As they went inside, closing the door on the Nevada night, both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, the birth of their child, the continued growth of their businesses, the evolution of Eldorado Canyon as the railroad brought new opportunities and changes, they would face them together, their love a foundation as solid as the land beneath their feet. And in November, when their son was born, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, they named him William Thomas Norris, a gesture of reconciliation that touched even the gruff old rancher for whom he was partially named. Wilcox arrived at their cabin the day after the birth, bearing an exquisitely crafted rocking horse and an expression of grudging delight when the infant was placed in his arms. Strong boy, he pronounced. Got good blood on both sides. Jack and Vivian exchanged smiles over the old man's head, their happiness complete in that moment. Their journey had been unexpected, their love forged in the crucible of frontier challenges. But as Wilcox rocked their son and the winter sun streamed through the cabin windows, they knew they had found their true home in Eldorado Canyon and in each other's hearts.